They're playing games with me. Everyone, it's gonna leave a few minutes for everyone else to have a chance to join. Hello, everybody. I think as we're hi Mary Blessing. I think as we're getting ready for everyone else to join the call within the next 5 to 6 minutes, we can just say hi in the chat in our mother tongue or the language you're most comfortable with, and a little flag telling us where you're from or where you are right now. That would be a great for us. That was a great way for us to get started. Hi, Victoria. Lovely having you here. Je t'ai fait bonjour. Hi, Jadesola. We'll just give it a few more minutes and then we'll get started. And hopefully everyone else will be able to join us while we are on the way. 1 minute left, and then I'll kick us off for today's community call. So lovely seeing you all here. So amazing that you could make time to be here. Right. So hello everyone. I'm just going to kick us off now. Welcome to today's community call. I'm so very happy to see you all here and the fact that you made time to be here with us and to have this very interesting conversation today about how any young person can break into African NLP and how you can get into contributing to this work, how you can put your language, your mother tongue on the map. And so I'm just going to give us a general overview of what the setup for the community meeting is going to be. So first, we're going to have a little welcome to the call. And then we'll have updates from the community and Masakhane leadership. And then we'll get into the presentation that's about how any young person, regardless of where you're from, regardless of what your background is, can get into NLP. And it's going to be a very practical way of looking at it with great insights from Benjamin. Benjamin is a young person, and he's also worked not only to contribute towards NLP in the African context, but also to enable other young people to be able to gain these skills. We're going to have an awesome time having that chat. Afterwards, we will have the Q&A, and then we'll have the wrap up to the call. All right. So I'm going to kick us off with a few updates from Masakhane leadership. Some of you may have seen this, but I'm just going to reiterate it anyway. During the ACL gathering for this year, Masakhane researchers were very fortunate to have won quite a number of awards in various aspects of NLP. We won an award in Brighter, and I say we because this is a shared win. This is a shared win for the whole community, and I want us all to feel very proud and emboldened by it. And so we can take on more research work that puts more of our languages on the map, that enables our languages to be inherently understood by technology. So the papers that we got awards for were the best resource paper under a project called Brighter. This project is led by Shamsuddin. You can reach out to him on Slack. We're going to have subsequent conversations in the coming days, webinars and community calls as well, where we interact with the key people, the key authors of these research papers, so they can tell us more about what the research paper was about, how you can be a part of it as a member of the community, and the next steps in terms of what's going to happen for the other research papers they're drafting, and how you would be able to contribute either as an annotator, a translator, a researcher, a data scientist, because there's a bit of something for everyone, and that's something we're very excited to have everyone do. So the awards that we won were for Best Resource Paper, for Best Task Award, for the Outstanding Paper, and also for the Best Social Impact Paper. We've talked a bit about this on Slack, and at the end of this call, if you haven't joined our Slack yet, I will leave a link for you to access and join, as well as a QR code that you're able to follow up on, so you can be more in touch with the community in the daily ways that we contribute towards African NLP. All right. Another update that we have is the Flores evaluation dataset. So we are working to enhance Flores as it currently exists. In the prior iteration that we had, we'd only worked on enhancing 4 languages, but now we intend to do a full, complete audit of all African languages that exist within Flores, and working as a community to be able to enhance them and improve their accuracy. This is something that we've been working on very passionately and very excitedly, and we will put out a call for contributions to the general community on the 22nd of August. So please keep an eye out for when this call happens, as we would really love to have your contributions on the languages you speak, on the mother tongue, and the languages that you think in. It would be so valuable for you to help us to improve the insights that we get from Flores. All right. In closing, for our updates from leadership, we are partnering with LAN Africa to easily avail data sets for African languages that are somewhat more obscure. Many low-resourced languages tend to have limited data sets, and sometimes you can't find those easily on, the internet, on Hugging Face, on any of the other main platforms where you're able to access these data sets. LAN Africa has gone to great lengths to be able to avail these data sets in a way that you can easily access, you can easily catalog, and you can easily search through. We are excited to have this collaboration with LAN Africa, and in the subsequent calls, community calls and webinars, we will be chatting with Chris as he walks us through how you would be able to use LAN Africa as an interested researcher, as an interested data scientist who would like to be able to integrate this work. So that's something we would love for you guys to keep an eye out for. This is going to happen mid towards the end of August. We're going to put out more updates about that. So we're currently putting out a call for a paper that aims to improve multilingual math reasoning tasks for African languages. And we would love for you to be able to volunteer in the form of providing sentences and insights that map, mathematical reasoning into the languages that we have in Africa. And so how you can be a part of this is, again, through Slack. That's a lot of the things in our community happen. You can hop onto Slack and you can have a chat with David Adelani, as he's the one who's heading up this research paper. If you're interested in contributing, if you're interested in finding out a bit more about it, David would be the point person to talk to. All right. So this is our honorary mentions from within the community, and this typically is a segment where I put out a call for contributions or someone who is interested in being supported in one way or the other. I would like for you to also take note that you can reach out to me and ask to be in the next honorary mentions. If you're seeking people to contribute, if you're seeking people to aid in a translation for some work that you're doing, this is our little segment in every community call where we talk about that. So this is our call to action from Contributor Covenant. So Contributor Covenant basically enables the code of conduct for open source languages to be as available in as many languages as possible because they believe in putting forward ethical work, ensuring safe community spaces where we're able to develop the software that powers the world and makes the world a better place. They are seeking assistance in content translation for low-resourced African languages. Therefore, if you're a researcher in this space or you're a technologist in this space and you'd love to be able to collaborate with them, please reach out to Mary Blessing on Slack. That's her tag on Slack, and she'll be able to give you more details about how you can work together and how you can contribute to Contributor Covenant. All right. And now we're getting to the good stuff. The reason we're all here today. We're going to have a presentation that is premised on how anybody can get into NLP, especially with a big focus on young people. And this is, I'm just going to give a general overview of our speaker for the day, and I'll allow him to get into it a bit more. Okay, so our speaker for the day is Benjamin. Benjamin co-founded, or rather has co-founded, Binary Tree. And Binary Tree enables students with a great focus on African students to be able to gain skills in entrepreneurship, in programming, and now in natural language processing. He's worked in languages and contexts such as Kiswahili. He's very passionate about this kind of work. And it's also very interesting to note that he is only 17 years old and he still makes this impact. And I feel like it's very valuable for him to be able to share his insights about how he got into NLP and how he got into African NLP specifically, how he's able to build this community, how he's able to take forward collaboration within the African context, even whilst being from another continent. And so I would love to welcome him to tell us about his experience and also teach us a few things about how we can be part of that revolution of getting more young people into African NLP work. Thanks so much, Benjamin.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
Yeah,
happy to
welcome him.
share. So I'll share my screen if that's all right. Perfect. Can everyone see that all right?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, as they said, my name's Ben. From Dallas, Texas. I'm an American and I'm 17 years old, going to my senior year of high school. And today I wanted to share a little bit about my experience with NLP, natural language processing for low resource African languages. So I'm going to be talking about some concepts in NLP and this context specifically that fascinate me and kind of through each one share some experiences I've had in Africa, teaching, working with people in these languages, in these cultures, and maybe a little bit about how some young people can get into this work as well. So, first and foremost, a little bit more about me. Obviously, I'm a high school student. The reason I started all of this is my dad is a software engineer. So, I learned how to program from a young age, and those were invaluable skills to me growing up. So, I started Binary Tree, which is a digital literacy nonprofit about 2 years ago. Originally, it was just because I wanted to pass on the programming skills that my dad taught me. And it's kind of evolved and expanded into a lot of different subjects, and including NLP. And it was very random how it happened at first, but I'm really glad that it is where it is now. And the other thing you should know about me is I'm also a huge fan of learning languages. You can see from the image there, I have textbooks in Japanese, Swahili, Turkish, Arabic, every language you can imagine. And I also love linguistics as a field as well. And this definitely was a huge part of why NLP appealed to me like initially. and why I continue to work at it, learn more, talk to people in the field. So, what is NLP? It's a question that I definitely wondered, especially early on in high school. As I was starting binary tree, as I was getting involved in some of these communities, I was running into programmers and developers and entrepreneurs, and a lot of them were in NLP actively. Some of the first people I met in industry in Africa were software engineers who were working on tools for converting between Swahili and English, or lots of other applications. And I kept coming back to this idea, and it really fascinated me. Swahili is a language fascinated me. I love, learning about African languages, and I wanted to dive into this deeper, and I didn't know how. So I've two images here. One is from a National Youth Day in 2024. This was a little over a year ago, and this was just an online webinar where we talked about AI, talked about applications of AI, and what we were doing. But it was entirely youth focused. I mean, we had kids there from Africa, from America, sharing our experiences with AI, talking about all the subjects that fascinated us, that worried us, that we thought were really important. And, the first piece of advice I'd give to any young person who's watching, who's curious about these subjects, who wants to get into it further, is to attend seminars and webinars like this. There are tons of them. I see them on LinkedIn all the time, free information online, just to jump on a call, learn from industry experts, hear perspectives that you normally wouldn't hear. That's the first way you figure out what you don't know, what piques your interest. This is how you kind of break those initial borders down and figure out what really matters to you in an academic context. And then from there, I jumped to, you can see some logos here from Three Blue, One Brown, Andrew and G's deep learning online, content. I jumped to online resources to teach myself as much as I could. In this day and age, we have so much information right at our fingertips to learn from, to explore. I mean, after figuring out that this was something I was interested in, that I wanted to learn more about, this was the next natural step. Absorb as much information as possible and dive into it. And again, I'm so grateful that I had these resources, that I was able to put aside the time to learn, day in and day out. And that was a huge part of why I was able to stay with this interest, is that I had so many great resources for teaching myself. So, what is NLP? That was the question I was wondering. And what does it look like in an African linguistic context specifically? You can look up the definition on Google, field of AI focused on enabling computers to understand, interpret, and manipulate human language. That's great. And I'd encountered it in my daily life, using ChatGPT, working with text summarizers, email filters, all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to get deeper in that. I wanted to understand the heart of it, the meat of it, what was happening beneath the scenes. So I'm including this slide for a couple of reasons. Here you can see some screenshots from Three Blue, One Brown videos explaining really elementary, large language model development concepts, talking about tokenization, visualizing embeddings, the matrices and vectors. This was the first time I started to combine my love for math and science with uh, ideas behind natural language processing and understanding how all of these different fields folded into one another, how they were all related. And one of the best things about all of this was the visualization. I mean, again, the best way to learn, in my opinion, and at least for me, different people learn different ways, but for me, being able to visualize these concepts in real time, not just thinking in layers of abstraction, but understanding each embedding as a vector, understanding how those vectors related to one another, understanding tokenization is literally piecing the sentences into parts and then working with those parts. Those are the visualizations that fundamentally underline, how I think about AI and NLP today. I still go back to those little thought concepts over and over and over again. And again, if I had advice to young people tackling these topics for the first time, it's to really lean into those visualizations. Draw pictures when you're, learning this stuff for the first time. Draw them over and over again. Play around with those ideas in your head, imagining different vectors, imagining the cosine relationships, or imagining adding and subtracting them. It's a great way to visualize semantic similarity and all of these maybe slightly more advanced concepts as you go along. So, pre-training tokenization for non-English languages. This is where I started to get to the heart of that African-centric focus, not just learning about LLMs in broad general terms, but looking at them in the context of African languages. Working with binary tree, the first countries we started in were Tanzania and Kenya. So Swahili was all around, all over the place. We encountered it on a daily basis. And one of the things that struck me about Swahili initially was it was highly agglutinative. So this is, English is like quasi-agglutinative. We definitely have some agglutination more from our Germanic roots, but Swahili, Yoruba, Zulu, incredibly agglutinative languages. And this can pose a significant problem for tokenization because when you have really highly complex morphemic words, it's harder to tokenize because they're more abstract. And if you think about like a Zipfian distribution, they're more on that tail end of the distribution. Anyways, it posed some questions to me when I first learned about it. I was thinking, okay, this is definitely really different from English. Do we have tools adapted to this? How do we overcome problems that are specific to Swahili or specific to Zulu? Like, obviously, we can't just build from a Western-centric perspective. We can't just build from the perspective that everything's going to inevitably be translated into English. How do we overcome these problems? Another thing I ran into was Wolof. When we started teaching lessons in Senegal, Wolof was all over the place. It was French and Wolof. Our students usually spoke three languages or more. And when I saw Wolof written down, it was kind of perplexing because the spacing seemed borderline erratic. Like words were spaced in all different kinds of ways, and it didn't seem consistent. And that's because it wasn't. Spacing convention, at least in written Wolof, is fairly new and non-standardized. And this obviously also poses a significant problem for tokenization. And that's another thing that fascinated me. How do you normalize spacing? Do you have to pre-process data beforehand? Do you have to normalize it to some like arbitrary standard Wolof? Like, how do you deal with that? There's also the matter of diacritics. You can see written Yoruba over here. Virtually almost every word has a diacritic marking. Most tokenizers don't account for this. The diacritics are completely lost, and thus some fundamental semantic meaning is lost. This perplexed me as well. And I kept coming back to these examples over and over again. Every time we moved into a new region, we encountered new languages, and I kept thinking, languages are so different from one another, and they all have such unique facets and problems when it comes to tokenization. How do we go about this? So looking at tokenizers specifically, I started actually reading papers on this stuff and wanting to understand it from an academic point of view. Found Afroberta, trained on 11 African languages. This was the first example of a tokenizer I found specific to an African language, and that was fantastic. But it also posed the question, how is it linguistically specific, and why does it need to be? Like, what's specific about these languages that necessitates these kinds of tools? Well, while we were teaching in Senegal, we were specifically teaching in the Casablanca region, and we actually had a student from Sierra Leone, and he introduced me to a language called Vai. Vai, you can see, is written here with these symbols. These symbols actually make up a Vai syllabary. So it started with like this quasi-logographic script, but it evolved into a syllabary where each of these symbols represents a Vai syllable. And that's great. It makes sense. It's actually fairly orthographically standard, but most tokenizers don't know how to deal with Vi symbols. They're used to dealing with a Latin alphabet. And that poses a real problem. And then I learned about something called byte level fallback, where you decompose the Vi characters into their bit compositions and then tokenize based off that. And that seemed crazy problematic to me because then you're obviously that's more computationally intensive and that's a short-term solution. If you want to build tools in Vi, you're eventually going to need to adapt to a Vi script. And I kept running into these same problems where it seemed like people were creating small, fallback solutions versus really addressing the meat of the problem. There's also the matter of code switching in African languages, where obviously because of a colonial history, you might be speaking one language like Swahili, but have loan words from English or French or Arabic and intersperse, different languages with one another to form, more colloquial linguistic patterns. And most tokenizers don't know how to deal with that. And I didn't, none of these solutions were coming to me in the moment. I saw all of these problems and I kept running into them again and again, and it felt kind of hopeless. And this was definitely a significant point in my journey learning about all of this because I felt like there were so many obstacles and didn't seem like there was anything tearing them down. Like every time I read a new paper, every time I approached a new study, it seemed like it ended on a, well, this isn't working. What do we do now? Kind of note. So one of the biggest struggles, obviously, is high quality corpora. And this is something I didn't really run into until I started working with Certify. So Binary Tree partnered with Startify this year, and I've interned there for a couple of months now, and I got to have a firsthand seat at watching the development of Power AI and other tools like that. I mean, Startify is not the only company doing it in the region. There are so many burgeoning, deep learning AI startups all over Africa trying to build solutions in languages that are not English. And one of the biggest struggles with this is finding high quality data, sound bites, text examples, anything that shows how a language is supposed to be used, quote unquote, properly. And this seems like it's not that bad. I mean, we've done it with English time and time and time again, but it's actually really difficult. And I started looking at papers about, okay, corpus studies, what kind of corpus are out there, what kind of resources are out there for training on quote unquote low resource African languages like Swahili. Well, they're called low resource for a reason. You see a couple of data sets listed here that were audited in 2024, and they saw that less than 50% of the examples were quote unquote acceptable. So they were not grammatically correct, had misspellings, or completely nonsensical. And more than that, a lot of them were parallelized. So they were lined up with English, French, and the language codes were marked incorrectly. So the model wouldn't even know which words were in, whatever language you were translating into, say Swahili versus English versus French. Incredibly problematic. And this shows you, what kind of resources you're dealing with when you're trying to build tools in these languages. It's a little bit disheartening. But there are solutions. It's not all bad news. So the next thing I came to is semantic relationships. So are there strategies to approach semantic relationships, given that we don't have a lot of resources, given that we have non-standard orthographies, non-standard spellings, high morphological complexity? How do we approach these problems? I have a photo here actually from a lecture I did this week talking about some of these concepts at Mbeya University talking about large language models and natural language processing. More and more binary trees actually expanded into topics like these because there's so much high demand for AI and so much high demand for learning about how do we use these tools in our daily life, especially for people who aren't software engineers, who aren't AI engineer specialists, people who want to get jobs maybe in tech, maybe not, but still want to know how to use AI and understand these terms in their daily lives. And that, more than anything, has motivated a lot of the curriculum we've developed. We want to break down these terms in understandable, palatable, digestible pieces. And that's the kind of work we're doing at that university, and hopefully, kind of conveying through some of the topics that I'm talking about today. But semantic relationships aren't always word to word. We think about tokens being related to tokens, but it can be much more complex than that. And there was a study I read about in 2024 that was fascinating, looking at sentence to sentence level relationships and showing actually better markings on some benchmarks. And you can also look at particular corpus mixing languages and using English as a basis to guarantee higher reasoning skills. And these were strategies that started to emerge. And I looked at, different papers talking about different ways to approach these. And finally, I was starting to see solutions. Finally, I was starting to see, okay, we have all of these problems laid out, all of these different obstacles for a variety of languages, but there are ways to do this, and ways to do this that don't involve just translating back into English or reverting to English as our default, but either using English side by side or completely new tokenization strategies to approach these problems on the terms of the languages that they're involving, not from a Western-centric perspective, more and more. So, what do these benchmarks really say about these gaps? Like, where are we today? Um, there were a couple of benchmarks that stood out to me when I was looking at this problem from a bird's eye view. Obviously, we're behind in most contexts. If you look at a variety of tasks, zero shot learning, few shot learning, translation tests, most African languages, low resource African languages, are behind high resource languages like English and French. But a lot of this has to do with the quality of data, and doesn't mean that you need new data necessarily. It just means you got to work better with the data that you have. I have here, an example from 2024 where just fine-tuning some of the translations led to a pretty significant increase in percentage on a reasoning benchmark. There was also an example of a paper I looked at recently about Nigerian Pidgin, where instead of just working on translations, because Nigerian Pidgin has such a non-standard orthography, they created a framework for breaking down words into their pronunciations and then using those pronunciations to standardize orthography to some kind of arbitrary standard, but at least made all of the spellings uniform, and then use that to run translation tests, and also resulted in a significant improvement. But the thing we have to realize more and more is that we have to build these solutions on our own terms. If we revert to Western models, we're going to continuously see suboptimal performance. And ALM benchmark here is a great example of that. When you run GPT-4, which is obviously kind of the most prevalent and popular model on the market today, a Western model, it performs significantly worse for African languages, but specifically Atlantic Congo languages. And that feels bitterly ironic to me because Atlantic Congo languages include Yoruba, include Igbo, include Swahili and Kinyarwanda, the languages that most Africans speak. If you look at population density across Africa, most Africans speak Atlantic Congo languages. So it more and more of this hammered into me that you have to build solutions through the right portals. You can't wait for Western companies to get behind the wheel and do it themselves. So why should young people get involved? Like, why does this matter? Is this just a particular fascination of mine, or is it something greater than that? Well, first thing I'd say, and I think we actually, mentioned at the beginning of this talk, ways to get involved with ongoing research and papers. If you speak one of these languages, whether it be Wolof, Yoruba, Swahili, any African language. That's an invaluable skill, and we need to use that to help to build these tools. I mean, more and more so, if we look at the data sets that really work, they're human translated data sets. They're not machine translated ones. Pre-processing by humans that actually speak the language that can recognize these grammar mistakes or spelling mistakes or spacing errors. That kind of pre-processing is essential. That's how we make the best of the data that we have. So if you have the opportunity as a human being, especially as someone young, someone that can get involved with this field at first, who may not, have a research position or have an internship at a fancy company, but want to help, this is the best way. If you speak a language, use that language and, help pre-process some of this data. And as we're moving towards the future, as we're really getting involved with this, human input is paramount. And you can reach out to startups and labs and offer input. You can reach out to Masakhane. You can read scientific literature as much as possible. I'm still reading papers about these topics day in and day out. They fascinate me to no end. It's something that I really care about, something that I'm fairly confident that I want to spend my life doing. So it's something that I spend a lot of time on. Yeah, binary tree touches on these concepts repeatedly. If you want to get into a space where you can actually reach high school students and young adults who are wanting to become engineers, who are wanting to, work on AI and NLP in their lives and want to learn those fundamentals, binary tree is a fantastic place to start. We're, running programs in Uganda right now with high schoolers who are incredibly bright, incredibly smart, who are already building websites, web applications, and are already wanting to study stuff at a college or, even graduate level. And again, there's so many resources online to tackle these kinds of subjects. Hugging Face, Andrew and G's curriculum. These were how I learned about AI from the beginning, and they're all free. They're all open access. If you want to start somewhere as a young person to just get a handle on what all of these words mean and how they all fit together, it's a great place to start. So one last point that I want to make before I wrap things up. You can see here pictured a couple of people that work for Binary Tree, a couple of my teammates. You can see Keshav and Ali, Sai, Will. These are the kids just like me who taught themselves how to code, taught themselves to understand AI, built tools, designed curriculum, and now they're distilling these ideas to hundreds, now even thousands of young Africans across the continent. And more than anything, this goes to show that I feel like because this topic is so burgeoning, so new, and it's so popular, everyone's talking about it, there's no limit to who can get involved. I got involved on a whim, accidentally, because I had learned these skills growing up. I was lucky enough to be in that environment, and I happened to think that I wanted to share them with other people. And then I fell down rabbit hole after rabbit hole and got involved with some amazing communities. And I'm so glad I'm here now. And I think there are so many people like that in my position or just a rung or two below, ready to get there, who are also fascinated by these topics, who are ready to dive in, who are ready to get involved with AI, computer science, or any other facet of it. And more, I would just say, if you are a young person, jump at those opportunities, search for them, cold email, teach yourself as much as you can online. And if you are in a position where you're doing research, where you're working at a company, where you might be interacting with people like this, people like me, uh, give us a chance. We might just surprise you with what we know or what we're willing to do. Yeah, I think that's what I have for today. Really appreciate y'all listening to me. Hopefully, learn a little bit from my insights or, appreciate my story. And I'm really happy that I could be here and share with y'all a little bit.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Ben. That is so inspiring and deeply insightful. And I'd love to open the floor to questions for anyone who might have questions. As our call is, relatively cozy, I think it would be okay for you to unmute and ask a question if you've got a question for Ben. If you'd rather write it in the chat, that would be fine as well. Yeah, Ben, I've learned so much from you, to be honest. And that's been very enriching for me. Does anyone have a question that they might want to ask? Yeah, sure, Evans, go for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Loud and clear.
All right. Yeah. I'm very impressed by Ben and what he's doing and his passion. Yeah, you can see it in the way he's teaching what he has to. He has. I am also interested in this kind of stuff. It started just recently. I am a web developer. I'm based in Kenya. And I am really interested about NLP. It started recently when I worked on a certain project that I was just doing to build my web development skills. I decided to come up with a website that it's like an audiobook streaming platform. I wasn't doing it for like out there. It was just to boost my skills, and then over time I saw that I could scale it, and maybe it could be something useful to African authors, because actually audiobooks are not a big thing in Africa at the moment. But then one challenge I saw with it is that one, production of audiobooks is quite expensive, especially with human narrators. It's quite expensive, and maybe AI would help in that. But now one challenge, you'll find that African audiobooks are not entirely in English. They have some African words, and AI is not quite good at that. And that was like I hit a wall in a way, and I was like, how can I produce audiobooks with AI, which are not and they are not entirely in English. Maybe I would need an AI that knows how to mention like Swahili names or some Kenyan or African languages. And I started looking into how I could train some models, but I haven't really moved so much in that direction, because it's like been like a month since I started looking into this. And that's how I find myself looking into communities like Masakhane and all. And that's why it was amazing to to come across this. But main
Sorry, Evans, I think we've lost you. I think you dropped out for a bit. Can you hear me, Evans? Hello? Oh, it seems we've lost him. Perhaps as we try to get him reconnected, we can take Saad's question. Saad, I can see your hand is up as I follow up with Evans.
Yeah, thank you. Good day to you all. And Mr. Ben presented well. Even though I joined late, I was trying to find the link to join the meeting, so I got it late. He did. He's currently doing a wonderful job. So I would like to ask Mr. Ben that whether if he's into any research related to African languages, that he needs contributors Like I'm into language technology too. I'm currently learning Python and SQLite to improve my skills and see the kind of contribution I can also make in the uh, language and technology world. So that is my question.
That's a great question. So actually, right now, I am associated with a lab. I am actively doing research, but it's not exactly in a linguistics context. I work for a bioinformatics lab, so we're dealing with um, protein sequences and aligning like how proteins evolve. But interestingly, the math behind the techniques we're using actually aligns really well with a lot of natural language processing techniques. For example, tokenization, which I talked about to some extent in the presentation, the underlying math is really similar to algorithms that we use in the lab for bioinformatics. In terms of opportunities to get involved with research like that, I imagine there are a lot of people that you could ask that would be, a lot more equipped to offer opportunities than myself. Um, Probably Masakhane is a great place to start with something like that. But it's really cool to hear that you're getting involved with that kind of research now. And I'd love to hear, in a couple months or a year, where that goes and what you get involved with.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great. I'm glad that answered your question. I'm wondering if we have Evans back. Evans, perhaps you can unmute and
Yeah,
yeah, awesome.
yeah, I lost my internet for a bit, but I'm back. Yeah, actually, so my question was to Ben, how one can collaborate with him if there's an opportunity to do so in that kind of training the models. I've come across things like he mentioned about them. I was happy to see that. So do you want people who already have that's if you're collaborating, who already have knowledge of how to do so, or would you train? And what would you want someone to have prerequisites, maybe hardware and all that?
So to be clear, my main capacity in my involvement with this sector is through binary tree. So if you wanted to get involved with that, we actually do have opportunities for both curriculum designers and teachers. So if you ever were wanting to distill curriculum, like share some of your knowledge either about NLP, programming, the projects that you've worked on with audiobooks, that would be amazing. And we also do interviews and guest lectures, so we would love to hear that kind of perspective. In terms of training models, like, let's say you speak Swahili fluently and you wanted to share like high quality sound bites of you speaking about a topic in Swahili, that would be also really helpful, but that wouldn't probably go through me. You'd want to reach out to either Certify or other companies that are developing models like this and share some of that data you might have.
Okay, I'm clear now about that. Yeah, thank you very much.
Awesome. Fantastic. I can see we have one more question from Rogers. He says, "Hi, Ben. Have you found a way to deal with agglutinative languages?"
That's a good question. So one thing that's interesting is if you look at Bantu languages specifically, and again, this is just from my reading. I imagine there are a lot of people in this call who could also offer perspectives on this. So, I'm not the only one that has to answer. But just from my understanding, if you look at Bantu languages specifically, there are kind of a spectrum of high to low resource languages. So Swahili is obviously spoken by hundreds of millions of speakers in Africa, and particularly in comparatively more developed countries like Tanzania and Kenya. So there's comparatively more resources for training models on Swahili. And Swahili, compared to, say, isiZulu, both of those are Bantu languages, both of those are agglutinative, but Swahili has comparatively a lot more resources, and or isiZulu is comparatively more agglutinative. So you can get into a field called dialectology, where you can treat, and again, this is getting maybe into a little bit more of a linguistics context, but if you treat Swahili and isiZulu as dialects stemming from the same language, or at least from some same linguistic original language and that they diverged from, then you can start to draw parallels between the agglutinative morphological structures. And then as you're training models on Swahili, which has more resources, which hopefully you can train thus more competent models, you can start to draw parallels between the patterns that emerge about Swahili and the patterns that you're trying to elucidate with isiZulu. So sometimes if you have a highly morphologically complex agglutinative language like isiZulu that you don't have the resources to deal with, that you haven't found a tokenizer that just quite makes it work right. Sometimes you can kind of take hints from other languages like Swahili that do train a little bit better.
Awesome. That was a very, very comprehensive answer. Again, like I said, I'm learning so much today. So thank you for that, Ben. I would love to ask, I think on behalf of everyone, you've cited a number of great resources and they would love to be able to access them after this call. Perhaps you can tell them if they're interested in being a part of Binary Tree, how they would go about that, what that process typically looks like, and then the other resources, including the slides, we could share them after the call. So if I'm a young person, I'm very interested in getting started with Binary Tree, where do I start?
That's a great question. So right now, binary tree is very open. There's not, it's not like there are a bunch of hurdles you have to overcome to be able to join the organization. I can actually share my email right now in the call. If you have any interest at all in getting involved with binary tree, just send me a quick email. You can literally just say, I'm interested. Maybe this is the experience I have. Where could I fit in? And we'll find a place for you. That could look like something as simple as just sitting down for a quick interview to share your experience, post on our social medias so some of our students can get a sense of, after college, what kind of career paths are there out there for software engineers, NLP experts, that kind of thing. Or if you're really interested in sharing a topic that you're passionate about, we could find a place for you to distill curriculum, design curriculum, anything like that. But yeah, I've got my email and chat right there. You can send me an email, very, very casual, and we can find a spot for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Ben. Rogers, I can see you have a follow-up question. You can have.
Yes, I want to ask about agglutinative languages. I was working on producing a predictive text model for a keyboard for my language. Then, as I went through the list of words, I had about 33,000 words. But since the language is agglutinative, you can see the same verb stem appearing over 10 times in the list, but it has different affixes. So I'm completely new to AI and NLP. So what do you advise? That list, if we take each of the verbs, we can break them down. We'll see that the list of 33,000 words may actually be 10,000 words or less. If there is a way to just extract the affixes and keep them separate, and then extract the stem and keep them separate. And maybe if there is a way to make the affix combine with the stem to form the word while you are typing on your keyboard. And so what will you advise? What can one do in that case? Have you done any research related to creating predictive text model for keyboards, maybe touch devices, keyboards for touch devices? And what do you advise? I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
I think I have an understanding. I haven't done research in predictive keyboard models specifically, but I think I could share something that might offer some insight. In tokenization specifically, so if you're training a large language model with an agglutinative languages, um, you don't get to specify how a tokenizer breaks up a word. The tokenizer is going to find the pattern that it elucidates. So it seems to us as humans really easy to just say, okay, here's an agglutinative word from Swahili that uses, these suffixes, these prefixes. Great, just split them up by prefix and suffix. Unfortunately, that's not always how it plays out in the real world. And this kind of serves as a double-edged sword because obviously if you have a morphologically complex model where you have agglutinative words where you have stems and prefixes and suffixes that are all put together, it is more likely that a tokenizer is going to realize that there are parts of the words that repeat. And the same suffix appears in 100 words. It's more likely to realize that that suffix should be a token, and that works well. The bad thing is that when you have this agglutinative structure in languages, you tend to have words that are highly agglutinative, where you have maybe three suffixes and three prefixes, and that word can have the same semantic meaning as an entire sentence or two in English. And this is problematic in the sense that when you break words up into tokens, you're trying to assign like some fundamental semantic understanding, and that semantic understanding comes from relating tokens to other tokens. But it's unlikely that you're going to break a word up with most tokenizers into 11 parts. So you tend to oversimplify the meaning of the word when it's highly agglutinative and then lose some of the semantic understanding. The solution to this, at least, and I actually mentioned this paper in the presentation, there are papers that are looking at instead of tokenizing based off words, where you might break up a word that has, highly complex meaning from all of these prefixes and suffixes, that might work in some contexts, but instead of doing that, you break it up into sentences and look at sentence to sentence semantic understanding at that level rather than token to token, word to word. And this way you preserve the highly agglutinative words and you still understand their semantic context relative to other really large words that might constitute an entire sentence or two in English. I haven't done research in the particular area you're talking about, and I imagine that I doubt there's a simple answer to that. I think that it's something that you should look into more, and I imagine there are a couple of people in this call that might be able to offer some insight as well. But that's just, my 2 cents.
Awesome. So I hope that gets you at least a bit of the way there, Rogers, and perhaps you can follow up with Ben after this call to maybe find out about the papers he's citing specifically, and maybe that could help you with your research and your project to work on the virtual keyboards. And I think this is bringing us almost to the very end of our call. I just want to say thank you so much, Ben, for making the time to have this chat with us. It was very enriching. I personally learned so much, and I hope that lots of the people on the call learned a lot too. I dropped in the chat a link for you to join our Slack community so that you can be aware when we're having webinars, when we're having more trainings or more research projects where you can get to contribute, enhance the existing data sets and the existing benchmarks that have African languages. I want to say a huge thank you again, Ben. And I'd like to ask everyone, if you're comfortable, to just put your camera on for a few minutes. So you can do a nice little group photo together to, yeah, celebrate this awesome opportunity you've had to just connect and to learn a number of things together. It's so nice seeing you all. Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you so much. So I want to say a huge thank you to everyone. I really hope I get to see you again in the next couple of weeks. We do our community calls in a bi-weekly way, and I'll be able to announce soon who our next speaker is and what we're going to be talking about. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Just by my name, you can find me on Slack, or you can find me on LinkedIn or pretty much anywhere. Reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to help. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a fantastic evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.